Kimunga Ukombozi, Kimunga Ukombozi, Kimunga Ukombozi, divine liberty, divine liberation, divine freedom, and all that that will bring for African people wherever we happen to be on the face of this earth. Today I awoke to the news that the hero Marcus Garvey Jr. had passed, had made his transition to meet and be part of the great ancestors. This is the biological son, the firstborn of the great and magnificent supreme visionary Marcus Garvey and Queen Amy Jakes Garvey. This is a son destined to walk in his father's steps of ascension. A son who became the leading light in adulthood of what, in contemporary terms, lived on as the Garvey movement. The living light of the great and magnificent Marcus Garvey. That flame lived on in Marcus Garvey Jr. and continues to live as we approach the important observance of Kwanzaa. We can see visually, readily, the living legacy of Marcus Garvey, the colors, red, black, and green of the Mishuma Sabu or 7 candles. You can see the colors. You can see the colors reflected in the Bendera ya Taifa, or flag of the nation. The red, the black, and the green comes from Marcus Garvey and was raised aloft in the lifelong journey by Marcus Garvey Jr. So in honor of this great soldier, this great general, this great warrior who has made his transition, I'd like to share with you some of his words. He says, universal African nationalism is a nexus of the basic prescriptions for African nation building that Marcus Garvey, his father, the great exponent of African nationalism, stressed relentlessly during his life. And he goes on to say, the first concept of universal African nationalism is African identity. This implies that all persons of African ascent and origin are essential and integral parts of the same African nation. For the Garveyite, the race and the nation are coterminous. A people who were separated from their ancestral homeland by the barbarous actions of the Aryan and Arab enslavers cannot be expected to accept the nationalities imposed upon them by their enslavers. The African in freedom has the right to determine his own nation, to delimit that nationality, and to seek the greater ingathering of African people from all sectors of the African diaspora. African identity is a matter of common ethnicity, ascent, and origin. It is real, physical, and definite. Universal African nationalism requires a universal African nation. The ancient aphorism, united we stand, divided we fall, applies with massive logic to the situations of African people throughout their recorded history. African identity further states that all African men and African women are brothers and sisters, and that we are, in fact, our brothers and sisters keepers. Common identity implies common and shared interests and common actions to solve common problems. In a competitive, heavily armed, and dangerous world, the people who remain separated, isolated, and weak will inevitably be overwhelmed by the organized and united races. But those are the words of Marcus Garvey Jr., the great hero who has made his transition. And in honor, we light the flame of illumination so that his light of brilliancy can continue to shine amongst us as African souls throughout the world. A moment of silence in his honor. This is a soul that dedicated himself, as did his father and mother before him, to the mission and purpose of African uplift, wherever in the world the African is, either on the continent itself or throughout the diaspora. This is a soul that lived for the benefit of the African world community. May Marcus Garvey Jr., Grand Elder, Grand Statesman, Grand Warrior, Grand Leader, continue to shine his light upon us so that we may rise and fulfill our inevitable victory with our own self-determined efforts for global African ascension. Kimunga Ukombozi, Kimunga Ukombozi, Kimunga Ukombozi. Divine liberty, divine liberation, divine freedom, and all that that will bring for African people wherever we happen to be on the face of this earth.